Well, hello and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. I'm here with my good friend, your deacon, Mr. Cruz Herrera. Cruz, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
Cruz and I were talking about some things that we were going to discuss in the podcast, and one of the things I wanted to do was to help folks at All Saints to get to know their relatively new deacons. You're not such a new deacon at this point. You've been a deacon for the best part of a year.
Yeah, I think so.
And so you'll be hearing from various members of the diaconate in the next few weeks and months, Lord willing. But as we were talking about it, the things that Cruz, you were wanting or felt you were able to share and contribute, which would be helpful for the congregation and perhaps others to hear about, actually really had to do with your life story, your growth as a Christian. And maybe if I preface it like this, we're a CREC church. And there is, at least superficially, a kind of CREC type of person, right?
Yeah.
And the CREC type of person grows up in the household of another CREC family, and they go to classical Christian school, or they're home educated, and then they go to a Christian liberal arts college for 3 or 4 years, and then they get married to the first girl they ever fell in love with, who they met at college. They navigated the early years of that relationship with consummate wisdom and maturity, and everything just kind of went smoothly from then on. And they arrived kind of clean cut and clean shaven at a CREC church. And here's the thing. I mean, that we laugh at ourselves, okay, as a denomination, because we recognize that every community has its caricatured exemplars, and we know that it's not true. Like, we know that there's basically nobody like that. We know that the people who appear to be like that aren't really, and therefore we rejoice that God has created us all different, brought us all from different places. And one of the things that's really encouraging, I think, as we're growing as a church, is that people who are joining our church community discover really early on that we don't believe in those caricatures. Right. And who better to bust those caricatures than Cruz Herrera?
Yeah,
and so just tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your growing up, school, church, or lack of church. Just tell us about all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess we'll start when I was younger, about my son's age, who I think is Liam, who's 6 now. I always have trouble with ages. We got many kids. When my parents divorced. So we sort of went through that at a young age. I don't remember a ton about it, but I do remember that it happened, and I remember some vivid memories of things that occurred. But while my parents were divorced, my dad spent time taking us to church, a Methodist church actually, early on, not for a long time, but for some time. If you guys know my dad, I always kind of joke with him because he's late. He always says, the party doesn't start till the Herreras get there. But we would get to church late often.
It might not be true technically, but it's actually, the party certainly kicks off when the Herreras get there. Right.
We would get to church late often, and I didn't even know church had an actual service. We always thought it was fellowship. We'd get there and there'd be punch and cake because we would never arrive on time. But we were in the Methodist church for a little bit, and that was sort of my first dose of at least getting some sort of training or learning about the Lord, which is a very small piece. But I think slowly that sort of tapered off, and we had not gone to church for a period of time. Fast forward, growing up, I was pretty much not a Christian at all. Arguably probably till I was 20 or in my 20s. And I wasn't like a far leftist person. I wasn't a far rightist person. I was just I just want to enjoy my life and everybody can enjoy theirs, kind of guy, with no sort of direction. I was married once before, for a short period of time, for about a year, and got divorced pretty quickly. After my divorce, I moved to Texas. I took a promotion for the company that I was working for, and still kind of not Christian, kind of just rolling through life with the usual things, drinking, going out, and the like. Not to say that, of course, drinking is bad, but drinking sort of in the context of my end goal was to, lose my mind at the end of the day.
Be carried home by somebody you didn't know. Right?
Exactly. While I was living in Texas, I was living in downtown Dallas at the time in the design district, and I was working for Bank of America, and I got let go from my job. At the time, I was known to Serene. We did know each other. We had worked with each other in California before I moved. She had also lost her job as well. Serene and I, during the course of this, very short intro to a long story, we had known each other. We had periodically dated during the course of all the way leading up to that. But we both got let go from our jobs, and we sort of kind of went our separate ways. I stopped talking to her. That was more me than her, of course. And my life started to rapidly change very quickly. When you're not a Christian, your identity often, and you can always tell a lot about a person when you ask them, especially non-Christian. So tell me about yourself. And the first thing that people will always go to is, well, and then they'll list their accolades. They'll list, where they work, how many people they have under them, their title, et cetera, et cetera. And that was me, very much so. I'd spent a long time really working hard to get this job that I was very proud of, and it really was my identity. And then in an instant, it was gone. And that completely changed everything. So on a lonely night in my downtown Dallas apartment, after many bottles of wine, I cried out to the Lord, and I said, I have no idea, what I'm doing. I absolutely no idea. I'd lost pretty much everything. I'd moved from California. I no longer had a wife. I no longer had a job. I was alone in Texas. I had no family here. I was living, by myself in Texas. I left my family. Everybody was in California. Papa Cruz, who now lives here, praise God. He was still living there at the time. My mom, my brothers, my sisters, no friends. And it was tough. And I cried out to the Lord. I said, I do not know what I'm doing. I need your help. And that was kind of like my only thing that I had left. I looked back and everything was gone. And I was brought to my knees in a very rapid and quick way to where, just the day before, I was living the high life at, Bank of America. I was a corporate trainer. At that time, I think I was a manager. And I was very arrogant. I used to tell people, I could probably do anything here and I will never get, let go from this place. Because everybody, knows me and I just have such a good reputation. And the very next day, I lost my job.
Right. And see, just looking back at that, it's when you think of that story and when I hear it and when other people listening hear that story, we hear it from the perspective of the happy ending or the happy ensuing years that the Lord has blessed you with as a husband and a father and a Christian. But at that moment, you don't know where this is going.
No.
So that crying out to the Lord wasn't like, okay, I'm ready to be given an easy path out of this. I mean, it must have felt like. Can you describe with any more granularity how you felt in those moments?
It was like calling somebody who is not going to answer the phone, and you're hoping that they do. That's really how it felt. And hoping that it maybe just like anything could help to change, because literally nothing was left. All the people all my friends all still worked at that bank.
Right.
Well, I could still spend time with them. I mean, they all had jobs. I didn't. But yeah, it was like calling somebody who is not going to answer the phone, or at least you've done something wrong to that person. They're definitely not taking your call. Right. And I was, going out on a limb.
So I mean, you mentioned your Methodist upbringing. Of course, members of All Saints know your dad.
Yeah.
Papa Cruz, you call him.
Yeah, love him to death.
Dennis Herrera, great guy, wonderful guy, and we all love him to bits. A faithful Christian man, and yet, of course, your childhood had taken a path which it sort of passed briefly through the Methodist Church and then out again.
Yes.
So what was it in your mind? Why call out to the Lord? Why not go and find a Zen Buddhist center? Why not? You know what I mean? There's a bunch of marketed or marketable alternatives to Jesus right now. So what was it that?
That's a great question. I don't think I've ever fully sort of chewed on that. I guess it's always felt sort of intrinsic in my person. I mean, even after we'd not attended church, for a long time, and I lived with my dad in my sort of eighth grade for a couple of years in my youth, and but I always remember praying every night, to God to forgive me for the things that I'd done the day before, and it was just something that I was always sort of there. It didn't feel second nature to me to talk to the Lord. Of course, there was a period of time, probably from 18 to 20 or until I became a Christian, where I wasn't praying at all. And that was nowhere near a portion of my life. But why? It always felt a part of me. It always felt in my nature to, it was just always there, I guess.
Right. It's interesting just hearing you talk, because one of the things that I'll let you into a secret here, okay? It's not really a secret. Well, one of the things that pastors are trained to do is to try to analyze biblically and theologically
Of course.
what's going on in people's lives. So you have this narrative, and one of the things that I find myself doing subconsciously almost is finding ways of parsing that theologically. And what you say reminds me of how John Calvin talks about the efficacy of baptism, where he says it's not tied to the moment of its administration. I take it in the Methodist church, you'd be baptized as a kid, right?
Actually, I wasn't
You
baptized.
weren't?
No, yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, that notwithstanding,
Yeah.
you have this you have a covenant framework of baptism, which in Christian theology is tied to God's decree, God's choice to save certain people, and that the kind and powerful hand of God stretches out into people's lives, and sometimes His grace to them takes years and years to mature, and it takes. So in the case of somebody who's baptized, this is how Calvin addresses it. The efficacy of baptism, the things of which baptism speaks, are not tied to the moment at which baptism is performed. So he anticipates people who are baptized as kids, which everybody was in medieval Europe,
Right.
Only subsequently coming to a saving knowledge of Christ. But more broadly, more like your experience perhaps, what's going on here is, as I listen to you talk, the Lord has His hand on you. And it's profoundly, almost disturbing, but certainly unsettling to think all through those years, you thought you knew what you were doing, and, there's some great times.
Right.
We'll talk about that in a second, but the Lord is leading you and overseeing your life, and at the moment He deems right, He will bring you to a place where you finally are at the lowest ebb and you see sense and cry out to Him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, talk to us about the phrase you use, something like enjoying life,
Right.
Because there is a superficial and very real superficial attraction in that kind of high life, high energy, young person, young adult, earning a fair amount of money, spending a large amount of money on entertainment and drink and
Right. whatever
else. Can you describe that in a way and reflect on it from the perspective you now hold about is enjoying life in a sense, but
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think you can look at it two ways, and we'll start with the way that I was in that time, and then we'll start with the way that I see it now. So, it's of no surprise that living a life as a young professional, was sort of on top of like the world in terms of my career at that point. Making a decent amount of money, and I'm living in a loft in downtown Dallas. At all these things, right? These nice and shiny things, and going out with girls and drinking and going to bars and things that we still do now. We go out with our wives, but now doing them in a way that's certainly not pleasing to the Lord. These are things that are perceived as the general secular public, right, as fun and exciting.
Yeah.
Have as many women as you can have, drink as much drink as you can, because you're only going to live once. We're not here for a long time. We're here for a good time, is what people say. And that can seem fulfilling for a time, especially, culture is so driven now to satiate this, very rapid sort of excitement for things that you're doing in the now. So you can have this quick satisfaction. And it's all over us, social media, which I'm a huge anti-social media guy. I don't have social media, which I think is probably going to be my best advice to young adults. But it's all over the place, and I wanted that. I wanted what everybody else was doing around me at work, because everybody in the office, they're all doing the same things. Everybody's going out, everybody's partying, everybody's doing that. But that's normal for people in their early 20s, especially people just getting out of college. Now, looking back at what and this is what I want at least young people in our congregation to understand, is what people aren't telling you about that life and how it is. And it's as simple as this: at the end of the night, when you're all alone in the dark, when everybody's gone, or you're whoever's left your house and the party's over, you're alone in that loft in downtown Dallas by yourself. You are alone. Everybody else goes their separate ways. Everybody else has their family or their other friends, but everybody eventually goes their separate way. And during, holidays or, you're not going to have dinner with family. I certainly didn't have family here. I was alone. And it was a very, very lonely experience. And that's how I see it now, of course. Unfulfilling and lonely. I remember sitting in my apartment in downtown Dallas sometimes after going out and doing all those things by myself and thinking like, the party's over. So I'm kind of left to my own devices, and it's sad.
It's striking because you've mentioned a couple of times what you were enjoying, in scare quotes, was a kind of twisted and distorted version of what God gives us to enjoy.
It's the devil's favorite game, right?
Right. I mean, my wife Nicole and I sat on our back porch just the other night, eating a meal and date night and having a glass of wine.
Yeah.
It's like, so we went out.
Glorious.
Yeah. But here's what's interesting. The distortion of it that sin introduces is a distortion that abstracts it from the relationships that make it meaningful and lasting. And it's primarily abstracted from the relationship with God that makes it a glorious and it's almost an act of devotion to enjoy God's created goodness.
Right.
But by the same token, it's then abstracted also from the relationships with other people. So it's a very different thing for a guy to be sitting on his back porch, knocking back beers and smoking cigars on his own, than for a guy to be sitting with a bunch of his Christian male friends, having a cigar and having a drink.
Right.
It's a very different thing to be going out and partying and flirting with a bunch of girls whose names you can't even remember which one belongs to which person, than it is to be with your wife in a context where the relationship gives depth to that pleasure and that joy. And I wonder if the fact that you said it's being alone is really striking to me. Yeah. You're now married to Serene.
Yeah.
And we all know her. Everyone at All Saints knows her, a wonderful lady. You have a flock of adorable and wonderful children. Clearly that relationship has headed in some altogether wonderful directions. Sketch for us, if you like, a little bit about how that began, but certainly how it proceeded from marriage and your faith in Christ. And I want to pick up the threads of, you cried out to the Lord in your apartment, but then what happened next? So weave all those things together, your growth as a Christian and the growth of your relationship with Serene.
Yeah. So we'll pick up right where I left off. So cried out to the Lord. So I had no job and I had a lot of time. So I said, okay, there was a gentleman at that job that I got let go from who had invited me to church once. And I was like, he had a long hair. It's kind of rock and roll looking guy, right? I was like, I don't know. I'm going to go to church, dude. But I was like, I thought about it. I was like, you know what? I'll go to church. I'll go. So I started attending this church out in Fort Worth. It's now called City on a Hill. I just started going. I said, I'm going to go to church. I, don't have a job. So I just started spending time there. I linked up with a pastor there who was like sort of the college pastor, and he kind of sort of started to disciple me. Fast forward, some months pass, and ultimately I get baptized at that church as a young Christian. Of course, Serena and I had mentioned earlier that we had dated. We stopped talking for a good while, so some months have passed. I'm a Christian now. I think we're probably about 6-8 months maybe into being a Christian, which I, at that point, cut off everybody that I used to know. I had none of the same friends, not being with anybody else, just at church. I was at church with new friends, new people, and, I had some thoughts about that, about Christians at the time, they just want to sit around and play board games, Settlers of Catan. And, and there are those guys there. You talked about the exemplars of, there are the guys that like Settlers of Catan.
I think I've scored a grand total of about 7 points in all the 15 games.
I haven't even made it past the instructions on that game. I haven't been around long enough at a party for those.
All my kids beat me pretty soundly. Anyway, you were saying.
I started hanging out with some people, and I realized very quickly, oh, wow, Christians are just like me. They have problems just like me. They struggle with stuff just like me. they're literally not. And do they like to play board games? Absolutely, they certainly do. And at least at this church was a little bit different, but good for me at the time. It was sort of the pastor would often say, we're a Baptist rooted church, but we're not mad about it. Like is what he always used to say. So it was very no drinking kind of church. I think it was a recovery ministry in a sense, but a good place for me to be at the time. I never struggled with substance abuse or anything like that, but I think it was good to get me no drinking, nothing. The Lord, be with Christians, follow Jesus. That was like what I needed to do at that point.
Right.
And I think it was a very wise choice to stay in that lane.
Right.
So,
and that speaks, I'm jumping in, but that speaks to the simplicity of what Jesus requires, right? It's like, okay, so we're going to stop doing the crazy stuff. We're going to find a bunch of Christians. I want to worship God regularly. I'm going to get baptized. I want to spend time with these Christians.
Yeah, and grow.
And let what they have infuse into my life. And learn some new habits of life. Learn some new ways to enjoy what God has given.
And they taught me a lot about, and I never considered this idea of friends versus acquaintances. And I think a lot of people get this really misunderstood. And being with Christian people really taught me what friends were and who were my acquaintances before I became a Christian. Because I think a Christian friend certainly is a lot different than maybe someone that we know and we're friendly with that is a non-Christian. Doesn't say we can't be friends with them, but I think, a friendship with a Christian is, certainly a lot more valuable and holds a lot more depth.
Push that difference for us. What have you been particularly blessed by in friendships with Christian friends, either here or at City on a Hill or elsewhere?
Yeah, absolutely. It's encouragement. It's encouragement. And I know that the people who I spend time with care about my spiritual well-being in the long run. They care where I go, and they care about the decisions I make. They encourage me and they challenge me. Challenging is even more so one of the biggest things. Challenge by observation for myself when I see some of the men that I look up to, and then also challenge. You and I have had conversations where, Cruz, have you thought about this? Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah.
So I wasn't getting that, but
Sure.
anyhow, so hanging out with a different group, and then some months pass, about 8 or so, and I started to think about Serene, and where she was, and how she was. I had stopped talking to her when we got let go from her job, not in a good way, just sort of kind of what they will call in the teen world ghosted, I guess you can say. Yeah. So she had probably no interest in talking to me, but it was just kind of like weighing on me. I'm not saying that the Lord spoke to me in an audible voice, call Serene or anything like that, but I just felt that, I wanted to give her a call, see how she was doing. She was a single mom. She had lost her job too. And so I gave her a call on a blocked number, so she would answer hopefully. And I said, "Hey," she's like, "Hi, who's this?" I was like, "It's Cruz." She's kind of like, "Okay, what do you want?" And I said, "Yeah, I just wanted to. I was thinking about you, and I just kind of want to catch up to see how you were doing. And interesting news, like I got baptized. I'm a Christian now." And kind of like quiet. And she's like, "I'm a Christian now too. I also got baptized." I was like, shut the front door, serious? Yeah. And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, wow. So then we just started talking on the phone and started sharing kind of what happened to us when we both lost our jobs. So she's going through that same experience as I am simultaneously, in a different place in California. I was in Texas.
And you had previously known her?
Yes.
You had kind of sort of romantic attachments?
Yeah,
in a
absolutely.
Way, right?
Yeah. We had known each other, for a good period of time. And yeah, so we had already had sort of a secular relationship together.
Yeah.
So I called her, and her life had completely just turned upside down. And we're like, wow, really? And so we're kind of like, it's kind of like that picture of Spider-Man where they're both pointing at each other. It's like, "You're a Christian, I'm a Christian," So so we started talking a lot, and started kind of getting back to kind of an old place, and slowly started falling in love. Actual, like real, like wow, love. Not just sort of like the, hey, fly out to see me and I'll send you back in a couple of days and we'll drink, we'll party, and there was no substance there.
So you've got then projecting into that particular relationship, the stuff that you mentioned before about it's not the ephemeral enjoyment, quote unquote, of just the kind of the party scene and drinking and that kind of flirtatious socializing. There's actually the relational depth there.
Yeah, like we were actually getting to know each other. Yeah. And I'm sure she was probably like, "Who is this guy?"
Yeah.
Because she knew a certain brand of me for a good long period.
You think you changed a lot in that time?
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, just in that short amount of time, a ton, like a tremendous amount. Just the way that you view the world,
Yeah, yeah.
the things that you now like look at. Wow, like that's those. Like how could I ever believe certain things?
Mm.
And just it was just wild to like I'm a Christian too. So, anyways, we started
Mm.
talking, and some months pass, and I decided I want to marry this girl. So I flew out to California. I proposed to her, I think it was on Christmas Eve, and the girls were there at the proposal. Taylor and Kaylee, our oldest daughters, and yeah, right on the floor in the living room of her old apartment with the
So
girls.
when you proposed, they were right there.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were there. There's more to the story, but if somebody wants to,
Sure.
we can do
Yeah,
that a
yeah,
different
yeah.
day.
No, that's right.
But yeah, so then things started happening in my life from that point on. Becoming a Christian just changed rapidly. So during that time, I was going to church, talked to Serene. We sort of rekindle. I get a job at J.P. Morgan.
Right.
Just like it all happened, like literally become a Christian, offer at J.P. Morgan, get with Serene, reconcile, talk, grow, share a relationship. I want to marry her. Move to California, propose. I moved back to California, which was like a big twist to marry her because the oldest girl's dad lived there at the time. So I moved back. We ended up at Pastor Craw's church at CRC.
No, that's my next question was going to be that. So just to explore that a little bit more.
Okay. How did we get there?
So Pastor Craw, so that Garrett Craw,
Yes, sir.
who's now at Buda, just south of us here in Texas, 3 hours down the road.
Yep.
But he was a pastor at a church in Santa Clarita.
Yeah.
Right. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so how we ended up at a Reformed church was, so the pastor that I mentioned that baptized me, he left the sort of non-denominational church and became a PCA pastor. And when Serena and I think we were at this time married, he had called me up one day. He's like, Cruz, I want to talk to you about something. I was like, yeah, pastor, what's going on? And he's like, I want to talk to you about baptizing babies. And I was like, oh, he just lost his mind. Like, who is this guy? Like, he baptized babies, what the heck? And Serene's next to me. She's like, "What is he saying? Baptized baby?" And we're like,
"They don't have a conversion experience."
Yeah. So we're then like he just drops his bomb in the middle of our living room one night, and I was like, "Okay, well, honey, let's hear him out. He's disciple. He's been my mentor for a long time, and let's hear him out." So he gave us some literature. We talked, and what is it? The Sproul and MacArthur debate. Really was kind of like the nail in the coffin too, I think, for Serena and I. And
I should say, just parenthetically, that's a great debate to listen to. I mean, and because firstly, all of us who are Paedobaptists have learned to respect John MacArthur.
Yeah.
Notwithstanding some significant doctrinal differences.
Of course.
But it's quite hard to find somebody who has had the impact for Christ that he's had. And that radio show that reaches literally tens of millions of people. And that's the sort of thing that charismatic prosperity gospel preachers get those numbers. But, we're thrilled if our little podcast here hits 200.
Right.
And so the Lord has used him mightily.
Yeah.
And again, notwithstanding some differences on some moderately significant issues, to listen to him and R.C. Sproul, the late R.C. Sproul now, just talking with such clarity and charity. I think that debate has been significant for quite a lot of people.
Yeah.
Probably cementing them on both sides of the divide, because it brings the clarity that a good debate can bring is just really helpful,
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
anyway.
I think that's a great one for people to watch if they are maybe wrestling with that.
But my own story of becoming Paedobaptist was trying to find the best Baptist books that I could find.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the seminary library thinking, okay, I need to figure this stuff out, and I'm going to hear from the best of that side of the argument, and then it's like, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure this doesn't work. I don't see how it works. And this looks now more persuasive. So, anyway, I'm jumping in.
No, that's great. That's great. So I was like, well, we have to find a Reformed church. So there was like a period of a couple months where I was searching in Santa Clarita for Reformed church, and nothing came up. And I was doing like hardcore Googling, but for some reason I never found that church.
Hardcore Googling.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's not research.
Right? Yeah, of course. So but I was looking, right? Maybe they weren't throttling the results at the time. I don't know, but I couldn't find it. But then, I went back to it like maybe 3 months later, and I was like, oh, okay, what's this church? CRAC, Santa Cruz. Like, okay, let's check it out. And this is probably one of the rare stories you'll find where you're like, how'd you find this CRAC? Well, I read Doug Wilson, and I saw, well, I didn't have any of that. I'll tell you a funny story about Doug in a second. But so we find this church. I call the phone number. And I'm used to non-denominational churches, admins, secretaries. We've been trying to get plugged into some churches around the area who you can never get a hold of anybody. I call the number. Hi, this is Garrett. I was like, Sir, and I'm looking at the thing. It's like, Garrett Craw, Pastor Craw. He's like, yes, sir. And I'm on the phone. So this is such a shock for me. And that shows you the sort of the differentiation between non-denominational churches, even like ones that are maybe like 500 people strong, where I'm on the phone with the pastor the first time I called a church. And I didn't even know what to say.
Right.
Because I was so shocked that he was actually answering the phone.
Yeah.
And I
He's
think
not hidden behind a wall of
no,
administrators.
yeah, it was. That's one of the wildest things that I'd ever encountered at that time. And he was like, "Yeah, oh, sorry, the background noise. I think I'm getting out of judo practice or something like that." And I was like, "Who is this guy?"
He does jiu-jitsu, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's like judo. Yeah, he did judo.
Yeah,
I think he probably does jiu-jitsu too.
I wouldn't tangle with Garrett Craw.
Yeah, neither would I. So anyways, I was like, yeah, I'm interested in the church. I'd like to come and check it out. Can you tell me about it? And kind of went through sort of the, easy things, to sort of palatable things to understand. And I was like, yeah, great. Look, we're going to come and check it out. We went one Sunday, Serena and I, with the girls. And I was like, you're walking into a different place. I'm from, dim lights. Lights are off. Pastor's talking slow. There's piano music playing. Lights are on. The pastor's loud.
Smoke machine.
Yeah. At CRC, Pastor Craw, he's boisterous. The lights are on. People are singing hymns. And it was just such a weird. I showed up in like shorts and flip flops and a hat and a t-shirt. I mean, that's what I was used to wearing to church.
How many weeks did you get away with that?
I'll tell you that story too. Yeah. So anyways, we went to the church, amazing preaching. I was like, oh, hymns, I don't know, hon. Like, I think that's probably what most like hymns. I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it through. I need my Hillsong, to stir my emotions, or to go deeper, as they say.
That's right. You go deeper.
And it was amazing. So it was certainly shell shock. We were about to kind of like slide out, and they're like, hey, you guys want to come to lunch with us? We're like, yeah, where are you guys going? They're like, well, we're going to a pastor's house. Like, his actual house? Like, I'm still not getting the whole hospitality thing, because you don't get that in a lot of other places. And we ended up having lunch with Pastor Andrew Richardson, and then Pastor Craw, and we're sitting there like hanging out with them after church. I'd never hung out with a pastor before. Like I've never, like, outside of like the college pastor at the original non-denominational church I was at, but I'd never gone to his house and like spent time with him, like, with his family. And it was just wild to me that we were, the very same day we were there, we were already sitting in the pastor's house talking to him and asking him questions. What did you guys mean about one holy Catholic and apostolic church? You guys Catholic? The usual questions that come up. Such an experience. So that's kind of how we landed there. And I think at that time, I was like, the Lord was like, oh, I know what Cruz needs. We're going to put him in a Series C church with Garrett Craw. Because I'd come from, again, the non-denominational churches, different sort of style, right? Certainly a different group that goes there, and things are done differently, right? No liturgy, and there's often that very emotional tie-in sort of gravitate you to that place. The very slow, speaking as they kind of edge their way into their prayers with the piano in the background. And I needed like a man who loved the Lord, a strong like man who I could hear, and it was like, speaking truth, and wasn't afraid to, touch on topics in sermons, or even talk to you about hard topics in person. At that time, like for Pastor Craw, after going there for like 3 months, I remember I came out of service one day. He's like, hey, Cruz, how'd you like the service? I was like, Pastor, it's awesome as usual. It's well done. He's like, good, yeah, good. He's like, that hat, you're not going to wear that hat anymore. I said, yes, sir. But
yeah, no sombreros.
Yeah, absolutely. Dang it. But amazing to have mature Christian men to teach you the reverence and love for the Lord and his holy service, to be with his people. Amazing.
But talk about that, because there's a side to pastoral ministry, which is public, pulpit. There's this kind of thing where there's a large audience. But then there's the conversations with an individual man or an individual family or a young person. And now I know what I think about those things.
Yeah.
And I have some fairly strong convictions about how those different aspects of a pastor's ministry ought to be connected. But I'd love to hear from your perspective. So you go to this church and you got the connection with the pastor right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And then before many weeks, you're just into double-digit number of weeks.
Yeah.
And he's telling you what to wear.
Yeah.
It's like, what the heck? But you didn't respond like that. So why?
I didn't like once he said that, I was kind of internally trying to think of, this is awesome that he's telling me this, but also like, should I be insulted by this? Should I, The Lord doesn't care what you wear when you come to church.
Maybe he does.
Yeah,
Great.
the way I've heard it so many times, and because of the challenge, I was able to be a little bit more introspective. And why am I dressing like that on Lord's Day? Why am I so cozy and comfortable in flip flops, shorts, and a t-shirt and a hat?
Mm. Mm.
But when I go to court or I go to a wedding, I'm in a tuxedo or a suit.
Right. See, the thing that strikes me as interesting, there's a lot of different ways of thinking about this. One is an issue of pastoral integrity.
Hmm.
And I know this is something that Pastor Craw exemplifies, and I'm sure at their convictions he holds self-consciously, which is it's just not acceptable to be one thing in the pulpit and something different face to face.
Absolutely.
Right? Because we have, you're standing 6 feet above contradiction in the pulpit, and you have the kind of the safety of, it's very rare for somebody to interject in a sermon and disagree with you.
Right.
But if you haven't got the spine to go and say to the person face to face what you were actually hoping that they'd hear from the pulpit, then you don't have the integrity to serve as a pastor.
Yeah.
And I think Garrett is a very fine example of that. But then subjectively, from the perspective of someone in your position who is experiencing discipleship of this kind, my impression, and certainly my experience myself when I've been challenged by other men, is that you feel almost honored to be treated like a grown-up.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so this guy is actually going to tell me straight what he thinks. And I can remember conversations I had with contemporaries of mine. I remember being challenged about Christian education by a guy who actually, he and I never really got on that well. Maybe there wasn't much of a relationship to risk, but it's not that it's not we didn't like each other. It's just we weren't best buddies. We came from different sort of background. We didn't really click, particularly socially. But he had the courage to just confront me about that issue privately, just him and me, in his front room of his house when he just invited us around for dinner at the start of the evening. I mean, way to ruin an evening. But I've always respected him for that. And there have been times when I've thought about that and about other situations, and I've wanted to do other men, particularly, the honor of saying it straight. Like, I don't think this is the best way to live, brother, or whatever it is. And I'd like you to think about this issue, or take that hat off when you come to church, please.
Right. Yeah.
There's those, and you start to realize, from the perspective of being a Christian, that the Lordship of Christ does touch everything, and so maybe at times we need pastors who are willing to go there.
Yeah, I agree, 100%.
Yeah. So where have we got to?
We're in
met
the Series C.
Serene.
Yeah.
You're in the series. Are you married at this point?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
married.
Girls then get baptized shortly after.
And so now, I mean, you've got you mentioned your two oldest daughters.
Yeah, Taylor and Kaylee.
Who are Serene's daughters.
Yes, sir.
And now you've got a growing flock of kids.
Yeah.
Of your own with Serene.
Yeah.
And this has been a process of Christian growth for a number of years.
Right.
And I can tell you what happens in my life if I think back to my teenage years, my childhood, and then my young adult years, which were really quite different than yours.
Yeah.
But all of us look back and wince occasionally in shame or disbelief at some of the dumb decisions we made.
Yeah.
And when you and I were emailing back and forth about what we wanted to talk about, you actually listed a bunch of things that you thought it would be helpful for you to say. Well, I don't know what you want to say about them. Tattoos, social media, and tithing.
Right.
It sounds like in your mind those are three areas where your convictions have moved in, you think, a more mature direction. And I think it'd be really helpful for you to pick those up one at a time.
Okay.
And give us your thoughts about what you've learned and how you've learned it. This is not about just regrets or something as superficial as that. It's about, this is how the Lord has matured you as a man and as a Christian, as a father and a husband. So should we start with tattoos, then do social media and tithing, or do you want to flip the order?
We can do tattoos.
Let's do tattoos. Tell us about your tattoo collection.
Yeah. So I do have tattoos on both arms. I generally forget about that. I like having them. I don't often think that I have really anything until somebody brings it up. One thing I like to do, especially when not too much now, but when I first we'll meet sort of like a conservative family if I'm close with them. I remember Justin Durst had us over not too many years ago when I first met him when we came to this church, and we were at the dinner table, and he's like, Cruz, so tell me about your tattoos. I was like, yeah. So, pay me about like when I was in prison for about 10 months. When I was serving my time in prison, I got my tattoos in there, and they really mean a lot to me. And I kind of talked through those. And Justin's looking at me like, okay. He's like, well, why did we have him come to dinner with us? I was like, no, I'm just kidding. I've never been in prison, Justin.
I was going to say, you dropped that one in there.
Yeah.
And everyone's wondering, he missed that out?
Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
So just that was a joke.
Yeah.
Right. Okay,
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Just
yeah.
making sure that everyone at home got that.
Yeah. No. It was a joke, but I like having them to an extent now because it does bring up in conversation to talk with people about breaks the ice a little bit. Like, hey, he has a story. Maybe we'll hear it. But how do I feel about them? Sometimes when, I don't know if you do this, but I know I do it. I'll be transparent. Sometimes when there's a topic, you don't want to be convicted on, and there's like all of a sudden, like the same time you're thinking that, there's a podcast that kind of shows up, talking about Pastor, was it Pro Rock, or the one that came on with the tattoos on his hands?
Yeah, that's right.
And I think I mentioned something about tattoos in there. I was like, oh, I don't know that I want to watch that. It's going to make me feel weird and icky. And I avoided that podcast for a good while.
Really?
Yeah, because I didn't want to listen to it. And I haven't got tattoos since I became a Christian. I have not had a single one.
Right. So these are all done when you're a teenager, young adult?
When I was in my, probably I was done with them when I was about 22.
Yeah, you probably can't do them as a teenager in California.
I started when I was 17.
Right. Okay.
And he was talking about his tattoos, and I was thinking about getting them removed, and my wheels start spinning because he didn't want those to be the focus, right? And I think you said it best in my deacon meeting, and this has stuck with me for quite some time. He said, you were talking about clothes and, presentation, reverence, and he said, Cruz, the medium is the message. And I think about that all the time, with stuff. And that's isn't that from a communications book?
Yeah. Marshall McLuhan
wrote
a book called The Medium is the Massage,
Yeah.
which is a deliberate pun. And the point being that the medium massages appropriation of whatever it says. So what you can't, certain media cannot be used effectively to communicate certain messages.
Right.
And all messages are affected by the media that's used to create them. If you look around us here, people watching us on video, you have these beautiful books, which actually are the property of James Jordan, when it's just sort of his library, which we keep down here. That the experience of reading, the Schaff's commentary on Ecclesiastes and the Song of Solomon, on the pages of that book, where when you open the pages, is different from reading it on Kindle.
Yeah.
It's not that Kindle's no good, but it's that the way in which we are shaped as human beings is profoundly affected by not just the cognitive propositional content of what we're hearing, but how we're hearing it.
Right.
And so tattoos and clothing are a medium, if you like, in which we present messages about ourselves. Graphic design, the things that we wear say something about ourselves. So that's the background to that.
Yeah. So I'm really stuck, and I just started, then I started kind of diving and listening to more things about tattoos and kind of, making my wheels turn. And aside from everything for tattoos, there's two things that I will say. One, I think you and I were hanging out for the 4th of July, and you made a great point, is that who you are as a person at the time of getting tattoos. Of course, we continually grow in wisdom, faith, and maturity, right? At least that's the plan, right? As we continue to get older, we'll run this race and we'll be better than we were 20 years ago. But I have 20 years ago sort of frozen in time on my arms.
Right.
And certainly a different person and at a different place. And I could certainly have them removed, I suppose. Probably a little expensive and painful. I don't think I'm going to do that. But if I would go back, I would not freeze myself in time that way.
Right.
So,
and that's a point about personal eschatology, so to speak. The interesting thing about this, I think, is it explains why people feel so strongly and so convinced that they want to have a particular tattoo at a particular moment, because we all know that experience of at a particular moment in time, something has happened, or somebody has achieved something, or you've achieved something which you think is so special that it's very hard to imagine at that moment any time when you wouldn't want to have that inked on your forearm.
Right.
And yet, even if the thing that you're referring to is wholly a good thing, let's say the birth of a child,
Right.
Even if the accomplishment is wholly virtuous, maybe it's your enlistment into the military or your enrollment in the police force. There's something about that mode of fixing it on yourself which holds you at that emotional point. I think of it in terms of relationships. We all remember, those of us who are married, that the relationship, the feeling we had when we first started to fall in love with our wives or our husbands. It would actually be profoundly destructive for us always to feel that way. Like, you cannot sustain that intensity. I remember the moment, a particular moment right at the start of Nicole's and my relationship, where I was so overwhelmed. A mutual friend had told us that she liked me too, basically.
And you were overwhelmed with excitement.
And it's like, heart racing. So I thought I was going to cool down a little bit. I was going to chill. I'm going to go to the library. I went to the library, did some work for a few hours.
Yeah, as one does.
As one does, right. So I was at college. I tell you, that 3 hours of work was the biggest pile of garbage I ever produced in my time at university, right? Because my mind was just everywhere. And it's indicative of the unsustainability of those moments. And precisely because they're so visceral and so meaningful, it's actually not helpful to enshrine them in ourselves in that way. Because the significance of that moment, let's say my relationship with Nicole, which I didn't get, I haven't got any tattoos, the significance of that moment grows because you develop as a person from there.
Right.
So you're not fixing yourself in time. And that's quite apart from the old, I think this is probably a doctored photo where it's like somebody's tattooed no regrets.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Anyway, but so that's the first thing.
Well,
it sounds like there's something else.
So the second thing will be, we'll put everything aside because, some people get tattoos, like you said, of birthday, it could be scripture even. And because this is a very nuanced topic. Everybody's going to have difference of opinions on this. But
this won't provoke any emails to me.
I'm sure. Gonna be easy. But I'll say for me is that at the end of the day, when I was getting tattoos, I was going for a particular look. I was doing something to evoke a response of the way that I looked. And I cannot answer, like, if I wanted to get another tattoo right now, I cannot answer getting it. Oh, it's great art, it's great this, it's great that. I cannot answer it without saying, well, it also looks cool. And what is that saying? Where is my heart in that? And what is that saying about me as a person? If he's supposed to increase, and how am I decreasing as I continue to get, sort of make myself more of a, not a caricature, but make myself more out there with these things. What is it sort of telling people about myself? And I can't answer getting tattoos without it also looks cool. I like it's not about me. Tattoos are right. They're a story, right? People will often say it's a story. Well, whose story is it? And who's getting the glory for that story?
So I wonder whether there's more to the Old Testament prohibition on tattoos than meets the eye. I'm very ready to say that there are, I'm fully up with a reformed view of the law, third use as a guide to life. Excuse me. But at the same time, there are ceremonial provisions which have to do with Israel's distinctiveness from the other nations, or with the sacrificial cultic system at the temple, which have been transformed with the coming of Christ. And maybe somebody wants to say, well, look, this, don't tattoo yourselves, don't cut yourselves for the dead, don't cut the size of the hair around your ears, those kinds of things they're specific to Old Covenant Israel because it's like make you different from the nations. I'm like, okay, fair enough. At the exegetical level, that might actually be right. I don't know for sure with the tattoos, but let's say it is.
Yeah.
But even if it is, there's something deeper about this issue of either being like the world or not being like the world in this particular way. And it's
Right.
one way of framing it is exactly what you said. It's whose story are you telling?
Hmm.
Why do we feel the need to create these markings on ourselves? And I don't think it's ill-intentioned in some self-conscious way
No.
all the time.
Right.
I think sometimes what's going on is subconsciously there's this sense of, well, I just want to be different and tell my version of what God is doing in my life in this particular way. And like I said, I don't think it's a self-conscious act of self-aggrandizement.
Right.
But I do think it's much more like the way in which communities outside the people of God think of their vocations and their lives.
Right.
If you talk to, or if you listened to a careers advisor in a secular university or a secular high school, you'd hear somebody saying to every person there, you've got to be who you want to be. You've got to find your calling in your life. You've got to maximize your
Truth.
you find a whole bunch of. I'm trying not to make it so obviously garbage, but you find exhortations which are focused on this individual as a person. What's the best, most wonderful you can be? If you talk to a Christian, and this is even something I said in passing a couple of weeks ago from the pulpit, what you ought to hear is, okay, how can I most effectively put myself at the disposal of the Lord Jesus Christ? What's the best thing I can do to decrease so that he increases? How do I become nothing? Am I content simply to disappear that Christ might be magnified? Because if I am, I'll discover that I'm preserved. The fruits of what the Lord does through me actually do endure. You think of Boaz. It's some way from the issue of tattoos now, but it's related. Boaz and Ruth both have in common that they, in effect, write themselves out of their family tree, because Boaz is a surrogate for Elimelech, and when the child is born to Ruth, the ladies of the city say a child has been born to Naomi. And Boaz and Ruth just, that's okay. I can back away. I can become less.
Yeah.
And of course, for that very reason, they are preserved in the New Testament accounts and in other references in Scripture. They become more because they're content just to fade into the background. And I think part of what drives the undercurrent of Everyman Jack and his son and daughter wanting to get tatted up is, I don't want to fade into the background.
Right.
I want to be different.
Right.
I want people to look at me and see I've got a story to tell.
Right.
And even if it's a good story, it's like, why do we need to be the center of attention?
Right.
You know? So it's not to impute all those motives self-consciously to people who get tattoos. I know lots of Christians who love and admire.
Right.
But
Plenty.
I think there's an undercurrent which they're in danger of buying into, which is mistaken.
Yeah. And that's what wisdom would be around, is to don't avoid the podcast that'll convict you, or anything that will convict you on a topic, because I think you'll be better for it. But
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just, before we move on to the next topic, I want to say just this podcast is part of our pastoral ministry here at All Saints, and I know perfectly well who at least some of the people are at All Saints who I think, guys, I'm not getting at you guys, but this is,
we love you guys.
We love you. I even love Cruz.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But the point is this: we can't. I don't want to shrink from raising people's awareness of important personal, pastoral, theological issues because of the risk of causing offence. The goal is not to cause offence. I hope I haven't. I hope what we've done is to provoke thought on those issues and maybe to encourage further conversations with both of us or one of your other pastors.
And isn't it great that we can have those conversations and, oh my gosh, maybe even disagree.
Yeah. And okay, so we disagree. Well, let's at least have a conversation about it and make sure that we're that the disagreement doesn't mask an unwillingness to hear inconvenient truth.
Of course. Yeah, absolutely. Only way will grow.
Tattoos.
Yeah.
Your email, or maybe it was my email to you. It was my email to you, but it was copying the text that you sent me the hellscape of social media
Yeah.
and why I haven't had it in over a decade.
Yeah.
This will be an entirely new topic to everybody at All Saints because they've never heard me talk about this.
Yeah. And this ties in well to
I
tattoos.
jest, right?
Yeah.
But go on, tell us your take on this stuff.
Yeah. So before becoming a Christian, you know, I can remember when, you know, MySpace was a thing. I was like, you know, everybody had a MySpace. That was the coolest thing. And then I remember the first time I heard about Facebook. I remember exactly where I was when I found out about it, and I set up my profile. It was like this new thing. And then I just went, you know, dove in head first in that era of social media. And it's quite a curious thing, social media. So naturally, it's just pictures of yourself, talking about yourself. And I did a ton of that. You know, my dad gave great advice when I was about 20 or so, when I was looking at going into the police academy to become a cop like my dad. And he said, get off of social media. My dad was an early adopter of this, and though he doesn't take his own advice now, maybe he's on their social media a little bit. Love you, Papa Cruz. But he said, get off of it because you're going to do, this was before woke culture became a thing. Cancel culture was a thing. He said, you're going to try to get a job and they're going to look at it and they're not going to give you a job. I was like, this guy, what does he know?
Boomer.
You know? Yeah, Dad, you know,
Yeah.
good story, Dad. And sure enough, as you've seen in real time,
Oh yeah.
people getting in trouble from jobs and
Oh.
things that they say. I've even LinkedIn, so like, I love LinkedIn. I've seen people not get jobs from LinkedIn because they were associated with other people that other people didn't like.
Right.
Think about that. I've never had LinkedIn. Well, I have an account that has, I don't even think it has a real name on there, but I've never used it.
Mhm.
But yeah, I like, you know, it's never been a thing for, I've never put time into those things.
Mhm.
But I did for a period of time. So it's pictures of me, pictures of Serene, even after we were married. When I was a Christian, I was posting pictures, politics. Oh, goodness gracious. You know, the worst of the worst, but we'll get to that in a second. But at a point when I was a Christian and I started, you know, had Instagram posting pictures, getting into political debates, religious debates. I stopped and I was like, who am I posting these pictures for?
Hmm.
Of like, who cares that I'm at the gym? And I was doing all the really lame stuff, you know, because I go to the gym frequently and, you know, with my jump rope around my neck and, you know, who am I posting these pictures for? I mean, what in the world? I got so sick of myself. As I sort of matured into being a Christian, I just got so sick of like, it was almost like a task. Like I had to check that off in the day. I had to make sure I, you know,
Update your profile.
yeah, or like do something. And as I continue to get older, I get more sick of myself. I want less of Cruz, and I want, you know, more of my family, my wife, the Lord. It's a bizarre thing. Anyway, so Serena and I, we both dropped out of social media. She has social media for her job.
Right.
But she doesn't have.
We should make some distinctions because I want
Yeah.
to jump in. You
Yeah,
mentioned but I'll jump in a second.
Yeah, I think what you're going to make is a good point. So yeah, I stopped it, and it takes up so much of your time. And I'll say to the gentleman at church, it is very wise to not have social media unless it ties to your job, perhaps. But if you're spending an exorbitant amount of time on chat things or Instagram or Facebook,
Mhm.
you have entirely wasted a lot of time.
Yeah.
It is so it's such a waste, and for who?
Yeah, and this is a really helpful perspective to equip us to make some distinctions.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, absolutely.
I can think a number of years ago, is really quite a number of years ago now, I made the decision not to use social media, and the only one I think I even use at all now is Facebook because, you know, Gen X.
Yeah.
But not to use it at all for discussions of politics, theology, and ideology.
Right.
Because I realized that one of the really significant ways in which this all goes wrong, and it's all the cognitive biases, and it's all the reactivity. Yeah, you're fine with it. And it's all the foolishness of drawing out the echo chambers. It's all the 50 gazillion different things that the extensive critiques of social media have now identified make it a very, very bad place to have a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so that's one cluster of things that I wouldn't do. What I do still is post occasional pictures of meat that I'm smoking.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or coffee that I'm roasting. And if you ask me the question, who do I post that for? That's actually a really good question. But I guess if I were to defend it, and I don't really feel the need to defend it, but probably I would say I'm posting it for the handful of my friends who are interested, and my posts are only visible to friends. But what you've raised is another critique that comes from a different angle, which is a critique of, like, it's just all about you,
right?
And the extreme end of that is like what you described. You've not been to the gym until you've posted a picture of yourself flexing in front of the mirror. You've not eaten until you've taken a photo of your food. You've not had a fun time with your kids until you've taken a photo of your kids having a fun time.
Right.
And it is the performativity which starts to displace the thing itself. And I think what you've said alerts me to a danger, even in what the muted use that I make of it.
Mm-hmm.
But then professionally,
right.
Your wife runs a cookery blog
website,
right. So this is a if I were thinking about consuming social media, I go online for recipes all the time. If I'm cooking some steak at date night and I want to find a sauce to make for the steak, I don't know where to find that in a recipe book, but I can Google steak sauce with brandy and cream, and I'm very glad of websites like your wife's one that that send that content out. Now, social media as a framework for putting that content out there seems to me entirely sensible. And ditto professional services and educational services. And if you're a painter and decorator, people are going to search for your business online, and if you don't have a social media account, you're losing revenue. And nobody is getting their neurochemistry hacked and having tens of hours of their lives wasted every week by surfing through your posts about painting and decorating. Right. That's not that isn't happening.
No, it's certainly valuable from that perspective.
So you've got that value, and I guess I would say the enhanced safeguard that you've called attention to would be posting a picture of, hey, we went on this boat trip 6 weeks ago. I took a photo of the kids and stuck it on social media because we had a fun time. Right. It's almost like an act of gratitude. But if that starts to become so frequent that it displaces the activities themselves, then you've got a problem.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's certainly good for work revenue as well. But the good news is all of those services and things generally you can find those on their website on actual things. Same thing. My wife's website, you can go there, but you can also go to it because we get a lot of number of folks from Pinterest, and we get a lot of number of folks from Instagram. So it certainly serves that purpose.
Well, the other thing as well is with businesses, especially those that involve skilled labor or even semi-skilled labor, people are realizing increasingly that just finding it on the internet doesn't help you find a good person.
Right.
So if you want to find a great, plumber, the fact they've got a great website and a social media presence doesn't mean they're any good.
Right.
What you really want is the guy who's been doing it for 35 years and doesn't need to advertise because everybody knows. If you live in that part of Saginaw or if you live in that part of Benbrook, he's the plumber you call, and he never has to advertise, and he's never has a day off that he doesn't want to have because he's always got work coming in because he's so good. Now that's what the review system then tries to provide with varying success.
Yeah, I think it's certainly dissecting in that way is great. I do feel strongly about that, though, especially if they're not using it for work.
Right.
If there is literally no reason to have it other than just to have it, I think you just the motives behind that, you certainly need to examine yourself.
What about your kids? Do you have a bunch of guidelines or rules for them? Because you've got kids from very young up to young adults.
Well, none of our kids had cell phones until they turned 18. Taylor, she's 20 now. She didn't get a phone until she was turning 18. Kaylee turns 18 September 7th, and she'll get a phone.
Happy birthday, Kaylee.
Happy birthday, Kaylee. And so that will begin sort of a new era for Kaylee, and it was a new era for Taylor. But I think maybe just because we didn't have that, it's, sort of like, I was raised in a Christian family. It's all I ever knew. I was raised in a family who never had social media. It's all I ever knew. It wasn't important to them. It wasn't, because I think, likewise, you see a lot of this going on in secular culture. The moms are living vicariously through their young daughters, and their daughters, they want to have social media like their daughters do. It's this very weird dynamic. In our household, there's not that dynamic of, my wife isn't taking selfies in the bathroom when we're going out on a date night. It's really bizarre, right? So the girls aren't actively seeing that in real time, like us having a life on social media, so to say. So no, they don't have social media, and if they were to bring up, hey, I want social media, I'd be asking, why,
Right.
why, and for who, and for what.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a wise question.
And then back to your previous question, the previous observation about it, that when you think you know who it's for, you may discover just after your first really important job interview that somebody else was watching.
Right.
And that's a bit embarrassing.
Yeah. And
cost you.
I promise you this, working in the private sector and have done interviews and hired hundreds of people, the first thing that I'm going to do when I look at a resume is I'm going to find you, like Liam Neeson, a particular set of skills. I'm going to find you, and I'm going to find what you're about and who you are. Because if I'm going to hire you at a company, which I'm not in a position to have people under me anymore, but I'm going to observe you. And if I have those things available, why wouldn't I look?
Yeah, why would you not use those tools?
And there's been cases where I've seen stuff so wild, you would just be, huh?
Okay, this is the sort of person this individual is.
Yeah. Well, yeah. You're like, wow, like that's not private. You didn't put that on private. You didn't, and you applied for a job. Interesting.
Yeah.
So certainly puts you at a disadvantage, and a lot of people don't think about that because nobody's ever told them.
Right. On the subject of nobody's ever told them, tithing.
Yes, tithing. Oh man. So, and going in the non-denominational church, I don't even know that there was ever they never passed the plate at the church that I went to, that non-denom. It was in the foyer, and you can drop it, like if you wanted to, like kind of as you walked in.
Right.
I'm sure there was a thought process behind that. So, if you don't do it, maybe nobody sees you not tithe. I mean,
it may be it's certainly in the seeker-sensitive world.
Yeah, well, yeah.
There's a kind of you don't want to give people the impression that you're just after their money.
Yeah.
And there's some wisdom in that.
Well, yeah. Well, because there's two sides of the coin in the non-denom world, right? They're heavily telling you they want your money, and then there's also ones that don't want to bring it up at all.
Right, because they're well-intentioned. They don't want seekers or unbelievers who are looking in to think, oh, okay, these are just like everybody else.
Yeah.
Right.
So moving into the CREC and just, a lot of the blessings that I've received from some of the families is really just watching them, seeing people who are like me in age, and seeing the plate go by. Like I talked to that guy the other day. He works at like Carl's Jr. He's tithing. Like he's, and then the plate comes to me like, oh, okay, put it over here. No, we're good. We're good this Sunday. And not ever really understanding that. I know Pastor Carl has talked about at least in some of his sermons at some point, but observing families and observing young men who didn't even have families tithing. That I'm a new Christian in a Reformed church. Like, does that kid is even old enough to work? And seeing their love for the Lord and understanding the goodness of His generosity in their life, ultimately giving a portion of the gifts that they receive from Him in tithe. And that took a while to set in, especially when you're, Serena and I, when we first got married, we didn't have a lot of money because we lived in California.
Right. So most of it's been taken off you.
Yeah.
Or you're spending it to just keep alive, right?
We didn't have a lot of money at the time. I wouldn't say that we were poor, but we definitely were couponing, and there was no going out. And if it was a very special occasion. I remember when she would get coupons for if there was some sort of wine on sale, and we could only get whatever was on sale. So one year she had well, I have a Jägermeister. It's a buy one get one free. That's about the only thing we can get. And it was $10 after coupons. It's guess we'll have Jägermeister. But we had no money, and other people, and it just really kind of blew my mind. So I started sort of navigating my heart around that, and understanding, looking back, whoa, I'm a young man who dropped out of high school, who didn't graduate with this class, had to finish an independent study. I never went to college. A lot of people, when I meet people at church, are like, Chris, what college did you go to? I was like, I never went. I actually barely graduated.
The school of hard knocks.
Yeah, I actually barely graduated high school. And people are always surprised by that. Maybe because it's my job now. But, taking me out of that, bringing me so far from where I was in my previous life before I came to Christ, and then coming to Christ, getting baptized, finding Serene again, getting married, being blessed, and inheriting two lovely young ladies as my daughters. All of these things happening, and what a blessing in the providential hand of God, and what a gift. What a generous gift for a chief of sinners, this scumbag, arguably even worse, how good he was, and how much I did not deserve that. How could I not be generous to give the portion that is rightly his, because nothing good comes from these hands. It comes from the Lord. I mean,
Yeah,
again, and I work at a bank. As I'm an AVP in PNC Bank now.
Right.
Probably bleep that out. I don't know if I'm allowed to say what bank I work for, but
No,
wow,
yeah.
that's not because I'm a smart guy. It's because the Lord is
Lord
good.
is kind. And we should just take half a step back, just having heard your story of kind of realizing how this obligation ought to work, just to sketch the biblical landscape.
Yeah, please.
So right from the earliest days in the history of God's dealings with his people, Melchizedek in Genesis 14.
Serene's favorite character.
Right, yeah. Abraham paid a tithe to him, and he, the king, priest of Salem, brought out bread and wine.
Yeah.
And he's a kind of type of Christ, and Abraham is the one from whom the people of God come. Ergo, you see that when you're blessed by the Lord, your first obligation is to bring that first tenth of it to the Lord to put to his service. And in this case, it goes to the priest king of Salem. Now, another way of framing that is God gives us immense blessings through our work. The first tenth that he gives us simply for the purpose that we have the privilege of giving it back to him.
Yeah.
That's what tithe means. It means a tenth. And many churches over the years have taught, no, not many, some churches historically have taught that this obligation has passed away with the coming of Christ,
right,
which is a mistake.
Yep.
Because it is the law of Moses which has passed away with the coming of Christ. And first, even that passing away doesn't mean the law of Moses is irrelevant.
Right.
But second, the tithing regulations predate Moses anyway. So even if you took the most extreme and unbiblical view of the relevance of the law of Moses and said none of it's relevant at all, not even the Ten Commandments, the tithing regulation comes in the days of Abraham. And if you think that God's blessings to Abraham have passed away with the coming of Christ, I don't know what you think Christ has come to do, right? So in terms of our obligations as Christians, what we're required to do is when we are earning money through our labor, we're required by the Lord to give 1/10 of it to him. Now, at some point, I want to do some actual math with tax calculations, because for some people this gets complex. But put it most simply, if you want to get half a step more granular, I would say do it like this: figure out your gross earnings, figure out your earnings after income tax and property tax.
Right.
Remove a zero from both those numbers.
You've said that
and find somewhere in between.
Right.
Right. Because the somewhere in between will be about right.
Right.
And I know that some people have a very strong conviction that they're going to tithe on the full gross amount. I don't think that's wrong. I think in some tax jurisdictions, the tax level is so high that it ought rightly to be thought of as like a plague of locusts. It's food that you never actually harvested.
Right.
And therefore, if you wanted to be strict about it, some of that the Lord doesn't require a tithe from. But it wouldn't be wrong to give it.
Right.
And I certainly wouldn't want to discourage it if that's a conviction you hold, and it will depend on your tax situation. And this isn't a podcast about tax, right? But somewhere between 1/10 of gross, 1/10 of net, and divide that by 12 and give that every month, or divide it by 52 and give it every week. It is that simple. Now, you mentioned the liturgical point. Just remind us again the difference that you identified in at All Saints, like at Pastor Craw's church. We actually bring the plate around the congregation, and then it's offered to the Lord as part of the worship service. But that's not what you saw in the church you went to formerly.
Right. It was completely absent, and because it's not. It was more feeling, right. How am I feeling going in? How am I feeling coming out? Did I have a good time? Was I stirred in the spirit? But it wasn't. Did I bring honest and reverent worship, being presented to the Lord? And it was all about me. And
right.
And then you see, again, like going back to the plate at Cross Church and here too, because one of my favorite things on Lord's Day is hearing the clinking and clanking of the plates, the audible sound of kids living out the Great Commission that their parents are trying to fulfill in them and teaching them the ways that the Lord has commanded them. Hearing that noise, some people don't listen to it. I always hear it and it's like, yeah, that's awesome.
Well, speak to that issue for us, because I want to come back to the liturgy point, but the kids thing.
Yeah.
We've encouraged our children to tithe, not from the very earliest days when they started working for money, but from even before that. Whenever we gave them pocket money or an allowance, we would have them tithe that.
Right.
Talk to us about your thoughts on that, like practically speaking,
Yeah,
training kids.
Yeah, I think it's important for them. So, like, our kids are probably a little bit different. I don't pay my kids really for anything. Lincoln, they have sort of things that they all do.
Yeah.
But certainly like Taylor's.
We wouldn't pay them for chores.
Right,
either,
right.
But,
Yeah. But if they get stuff, we do encourage the same thing. So if they get money from Lincoln or Kaylee, Taylor have gotten money in the past from grandparents or something like that, we'll give a portion of that to the Lord. And we haven't always been great about that. I'm not saying we've done it every time, but it's certainly we've always tried to instill that in them at a young age because again, repetition, right? This is going to be something that they'll see and they'll always know. We always say, let there never be a day that our children didn't know the Lord. Let them never remember a day that they didn't know that they were tithing.
Yeah. So certainly the first point at which they're actually earning money,
right?
Whether it's a job where mowing the neighbor's lawn or you're giving them an allowance because we have one of our kids, in fact, all three of our kids have done it now, have had responsibility for garden maintenance. We pay them for that because we think that goes the way we've arranged our household. It's a bit above and beyond the ordinary chores. Normally, I do the backyard maintenance. So we're going to pay them for that. They'll tithe from that. And then certainly when they start working for Chick-fil-A or whatever it is.
Yeah, certainly at the earliest income, absolutely, 100%. Because you have to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And how else are you going to do it? It's not something you're going to switch on.
Yes.
Right? You can't just switch these things on. Yeah. I'm 20 now, I'm going to start to tithe. No, because I was 20 and I didn't.
Because that's fascinating. It's the process of maturing that you're pointing to. And in a sense, one of the lessons from your experience is you grew up through your teenage years and into young adulthood, and you got yourself into a position where what was needed was serious surgery.
Yeah.
And that was like crunching the gears, trying to get, and the Lord bringing you painfully back to a place of increasing faithfulness and commitment to Him. And we don't want to set that as a paradigm for our children. We want our children to have the experience of gradually growing day by day and year by year into increasing maturity. And the way to do that is to set those patterns. Right.
And especially for our family in particular, Serene, her parents are still married. My parents not. I'd been divorced as well. But our kids have a chance to hopefully have a very boring testimony.
Right.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
And they are going to be sort of like they're in now a family who's been Christian their whole lives, except for the girls, but they were fairly young, I think it was like 4 and 6 or somewhere around there, that they will always known the Lord and they've always been in this family. And of course, the hope is that they will continue to be trained up and they'll do things such as tithing. So,
yeah, very good. I wanted to close off the point about the liturgical element of the tithing and then come back to you. Any final thoughts you want to share with our listeners? Just in practical terms, I know a lot of people for whom it's helpful just to tithe by autopay monthly.
Right.
And actually, that's what my family and I do.
Right.
And that was always our habit in the past. That actually mirrors the structure by which I get paid. So, so that makes sense. But actually, I've increasingly wondered whether there isn't some significant value in doing what I know at least one of my fellow pastors, actually it's Pastor Neil, I don't think he'd mind me saying this, because I think he said it publicly. He is part of his Sunday morning routine. Yeah, he will write a check and put it in an envelope, and so he can present it. And it has a liturgical function in the service of being the offering from the people. Yeah. Now I wouldn't want to say. Clearly, I wouldn't want to say because it's not my practice that it's required to put it in that plate. Yeah. But I do think though that we need to be organised about it. Yeah. We need to be disciplined about it. Mm-hmm. If you're not disciplined enough to do it every week or every month by writing a check, then autopay is what you're going to have to do. Right. And obviously for people who are paid less regularly, that in contracts or whatever, their income isn't a monthly income, something like a weekly tithe will be more appropriate. Right. But one way or another, this has to be done. Because it's just part of basic Christian faithfulness.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the more nerdy reform guys, who love leather-bound books and smoking a pipe, I think that Zelle, probably not their favorite way of tithing, right? I think those guys are probably putting it in the plate. Mm-hmm. I was talking to, I think it was Deacon Brandt, who I love immensely. I was like, do you ever use Zelle? He's like, oh, I like to put it in the plate. Mm-hmm. That's like a part of like his his sort of liturgy, right? And our worship. We do it through check. You can also do Zelle too, and we do that when Serene usually has a checkbook because I always lose it.
Praise God for our organized wives.
Yes. So if mom forgets it, she'll double the next Sunday, or she'll do a Zelle. She hates doing Zelle stuff anyway. But certainly you can do whichever way. But I like doing it in the play because again, your children aren't going to see the Zelle.
That's right.
So they're not going to see that go around. And not to say that again, there's a right or wrong way, but there's something about it. There's something about just like picking up a book instead of a Kindle, smoking a pipe instead of a Zyn packet. There's something about that tangible.
Yeah, the medium is the message.
Yeah, there you go. Amen.
Deacon Cruz Herrera, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Members of All Saints and anybody else listening in, Lord bless you, and bye for now.